All right, we're tying the famous woolly bugger. It's a super funny name, but it turns out to be a pretty good fly. Use some great materials to tie the specific one, and I really like the color pattern. This is a size 12 hook, and I put a bead on the front of it to give it the ability to sink down below the water. And I'm using some olive 6/0 thread, starting from right behind the bead itself, winding backwards. We don't need the tail of the thread here, so I chop that off and build a base of thread going from the eye down towards the hook side of the shank. This is some turkey blood quill, and this is in an olive color, and this is what's going to give the tail backside of the bugger its distinct shape, but also the body a little bit of taper to it. And so I took this, hung it off at the backside about an extra hook's length in regards to how long it is, and then took with a few pinch knots and began to attach this to the hook itself, giving it a few lighter wraps, and then once I was happy with it, giving it some tighter wraps to really lock it onto the shank itself. Once you have it locked down, you can grab your scissors and chop off the front part of this as you won't need it, and give it some loops to tie the straggly pieces down to the hook itself, tying in right behind the weighted front part. And you want to go all the way back towards the shank right before it starts to loop down on the hook itself to build another thread base to make the tail sit as it needs to be. This is some simple medium gauge wire, and this is going to help give it some more weight. And so I tuck it right underneath the bead to hold it down, and use your thread to wrap it and attach it right on top of that quill. And we'll use this at the very, very end to do a final wrap once we get the dubbing put on here. Make sure it's accessible after wrapping that piece up. I wet the thread with a little bit of saliva, and then this is some just basic brown dubbing, and I'm attaching it to the thread itself, starting from the top, and I wrapped about 3 inches of the thread with this dubbing, keeping it fairly light, wrapping in a counterclockwise motion, attaching it to the thread itself. Please take a second to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Let me know down below what you've enjoyed about this specific video, maybe what you've learned tying this fly yourself, or some maybe flies you want to see tied in the future. Your comments, your liking, and subscription really helps the channel as it grows. I'm using my rotary vise to wind the dubbing onto this. You can use the thread itself to go in a circle. I find with these larger flies, using the vise helps me to get a more consistent wrap, and I'm able to keep a better eye on where the dubbing's going. So I'm wrapping going backwards with the dubbing ending on the back side of this fly, keeping my thread to the back side, and you'll see why in a second. So once I'm happy with that, this is some Rooster Hackle dyed in black, and I attach that back towards the back side of this, and I'm going to wrap the hackle moving forward, giving the flare of the feather itself the ability to evenly distribute around the body of this woolly bugger. I'm using a set of Hackle Flyers. You can use your fingers too if you wanted, and as evenly as you can, spacing out these wraps, wrapping the hackle from the back moving forward, ending right behind the bead. Once I'm happy with that wrap, I leave this hanging, and I left my thread in the back part of this because it's a really nice green color, and I wanted that green to find its way in between the fibers of the hackle. So you can see as I'm wrapping back forward, I'm moving the thread around to make its way in between the fibers, and it's going to give a little bit of a green pattern in behind the hackle of the body of this. Once I get to the front, behind the bead itself, I'll do some finishing wraps to really tie that front part of the hackle on before snipping off the final part of the hackle that I don't need. A few more loops just to make sure that hackle is tied down nice and tight. And then I'm going to grab the wire and do the same thing I did with the thread, moving around a little bit to get it to fit in between the fibers of the hackle, and this will give some more weight and some more shine into the fly itself. Moving it around, keeping it evenly spaced as I move towards the front, ending right behind the bead of the fly. Once I'm happy with it, I'll take the thread and wrap and attach this wire to the hook itself with some good attaching loops. And then I'll windmill this wire itself off with a few twists. Adjust the hackle, a few more loops to reattach the end of that wire. And then once you're happy with everything being attached and tied down, you can grab your whip finisher and put 4 to 5 finishing loops on the front of this fly right behind that bead to finish locking in this woolly bugger. If you struggle with whip finishing, down in the description below, I put a video of how to whip finish that hopefully is helpful as you learn how to tie flies. Once you finish tying the whip finish, you can get your scissors, cut that off, readjust, and there you have the woolly bugger. Hope you enjoyed this one. It was a fun one to tie, and I hope to see you on the next one. Happy tying!